Hi everyone, my name is Soraya Fouladi. I'm the founder and CEO of JARA. We're scaling quality education to some of the most under-resourced regions of the world, such as refugee camps, post-disaster zones, war zones, and more. And we're doing this through an IoT device that we're building. So I want to first ask, raise your hand if you know somebody under 18. Yep, most of us. Now think about who they are. Now raise your hand if you know 2 people under 18. Think about who those 2 people are. What if I were to tell you that 1 in 2 children today are living in poverty? That means they have a decreased chance of getting a quality education and ever breaking the cycle of poverty. Now picture 10 children in poverty. 3 out of those 10 children in poverty do not have access to a classroom. That's 264 million children in this world who don't have access to a classroom. But think about this. When you thought of the 2 children that you know under 18, how many of you actually know one of those 264 million children who don't have access to a classroom? Yep, 1 out of this whole room. Why? Why are we so far removed from this huge population of children in this world? We have the media to turn to this. So when a natural disaster hits, or human-made disaster hits, we hear about it for maybe maximum 2 weeks to a month. And then after, we don't hear much about it. And what most people think, is what we found, is that humanitarian aid and disaster relief did such a good job that that region is where it was before the disaster hit. Unfortunately, this is not the truth. In the past 30 years, over 300 regions of the world that have been hit by natural disaster have not had their infrastructure rebuilt, which usually means that the schools that used to be there are gone, that more and more children are getting displaced out of getting a chance at education and ever getting a hope of achieving success in whatever success means for that child in that region. And currently, there's 535 million children living in disaster, post-disaster, or war zones. 535 million children. And this is something that I became very, very, very aware of when I was about 14, 15 years old. And that's one of the reasons I started all of this. But I'd love to first start by sharing my story of really how we got from where I started to here. How it happened that I've committed my life to this mission and how it's going to be my whole life's work. So I was born into a multicultural family. And I was very lucky that I was given a spot to attend the United Nations International School in New York City. This school is a very special school. Between the student and teacher body, we represented over 150 different regions of the world. We learned international history. We learned over 17 religions. We learned about even from first grade, we learned about the truths of the world, that there is famine, that there is modern day slavery. We learned what the world really is. When a disaster hit, we learned about the initiatives that were being implemented, and we got to follow those journeys for that year, 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years to see what succeeded and what failed and why. So from a very young age, I learned about the truths of the world and what works and doesn't work in the field of humanitarian aid. And yeah, it definitely sounds super linear going from that to where I am now. As life is, it was actually the opposite of linear. So growing up, I thought I was going to become a professional ballet dancer. I was training every day. It was my whole world and everything, my core passion. And then when I was a teenager, right, as my skill was, hitting its peak, as everything was about to take off, I did a very teenager thing and tried skateboarding one day. Yep. Unfortunately, I fell off and broke my ankle and had to get a lot of titanium implants. And that was the moment that really ended my dance career. And I don't know how many of you can resonate, but maybe quite a few of you. When you have a dream and then it's gone overnight, is one of the most painful things. So I spent the next year just lost. I lost my identity. I lost my sense of self. I lost my passion, and I lost my future. I did not know where to turn. And this was when I was about 15, age 15. So I thought about, what things do I actually care about in this world? And it wasn't yet humanitarian development or everything in the world. I actually was like, well, I'm scared of my own death, so why don't I go into life extension research? To which I did. I found an internship at a university in New York City called Cooper Union, and they had a neurophysiology lab, which is a brain-body connection. And I took the internship there, and the team I was on, we had this huge breakthrough, which made me think, wow, anything is possible in this industry. So I had this huge 65-year research plan that I wanted to implement for how to enable our human selves to live forever. There are these things called animats, which is where you take neurons from a species, create a neural network, a little different than the neural network most of you are familiar with, it's more a biological one, put it into a robot, and then that robot starts behaving like that animal used to behave. So it's been done with mice, it's been done with snails and a few others. So I was like, what if we do this with humans so that we can live forever and maybe our consciousness will follow? So I planned my whole life to do that. And I created this huge research plan. But before I dove into it, I wanted to ensure I wasn't setting myself up for a situation where something could happen overnight and my whole career would be gone. The same way that, happened with my dance career. I didn't really want that because it was so painful. So I asked myself a few questions. I asked myself, what if I fail? What if I succeed? And why am I doing this? So what if I succeeded? It looked like, well, I'm 90-something years old, I'm living forever, but was this a life I really want to extend if all I did was hide underground working on this research? And where are my friends? That was one question that came to mind. And then what next? What now? The other one was, the big thing that really got me was, what if I fail? And what if I fail looks like me on my own deathbed? And that was very troubling. I was like, why is it just me on my own deathbed? And that's when it hit me. I wasn't doing this for you to be living forever. I was doing it just for myself. And that's when it really got to me that I was doing this out of fear. I was about to go into a life working on something for selfish reasons out of fear. And I knew that's not the life that I wanted to live. So it was in that moment that I had a few epiphanies. The first one being, I always thought death was the worst thing for a human. But then I realized what's worse than death is being alive and not being able to live your life fully while alive just because of the situation you were born into. And I just found that so completely unfair, because so much of this world is born to situations that determine their whole future or fall into situations that do the same. And why is it that so much of our population, the people we know, we get to live our lives, do whatever we want, while the rest of the world does not ever get the chance to achieve what they want to see in the world or in themselves? The second one was, I realized life goals, they're not really sustainable because you either finish it or fail at it. And then what? So instead, I was like, I need to come up with something that's sustainable, something I could practice every day, something infinite, inexhaustible, with no means to an end. So that's when it hit me, a purpose and a mission. That's something that I continuously practice every day, that I could live by and always live forever in. So I needed to develop one that would be something I could really embody. So I developed a mission of accelerating positive change in this world. And I really loved this idea. In every decision I was faced, I would automatically choose the one that would accelerate positive change. But I realized I couldn't next day automatically be someone who embodies this fully. I needed to really train myself. So I kind of compared this to machine learning for the human. So I spent the next year training myself to accelerate positive change. So what this looked like for a young high schooler was a few months doing it on a small scale to start. So what this looked like was tutoring people for free, holding the door open in the hallway just a little bit longer so someone could get through, going out of my way to just help people and systems out. And once after a few months, I really felt I got this down on the small scale. So what does a medium scale of this look like? So spring break was coming up, and the tsunami and earthquake in Japan had just hit. So I wanted to do something about it. So I started an initiative called Jamming for Relief, where we got a bunch of youth musicians together in New York to spend our spring break playing music on the streets of New York to raise money for disaster relief in Japan. And I did a few more initiatives like that. So here we are, a year later, after spending every single moment slowly and intentionally figuring out how to accelerate positive change. I feel like I became really the embodiment of this mission and purpose. So then I was like, okay, I want this life that I have to have the biggest impact I can possibly have. So I was like, okay, how do we do this? How do we accelerate positive change on the biggest scale possible? So the United Nations School had taught me all about all these big issues in the world, like modern day slavery, famine, climate change, and more. So I was like, oh my gosh, so many issues. Well, I have a lot of years. Why don't I spend maybe 5 to 10 years on each one of these issues? So I was sitting there thinking, wow, that's perfect. I figured it out. And then it hit me. If a disaster can uproot centuries of hard work of a region of the world, couldn't a gust of wind uproot my life's work if I only move the needle a little bit in each of these world issues? So I was like, well, there's this whole list of issues. What if I figure out what the root cause of all these issues are, and then get hundreds of millions of people by my side to work on that? Wouldn't that undo most of these world issues? And the answer is yes. So I had to figure out what is the root cause of so many of the world's issues. So I did a big deep dive into researching, into talking to so many people who work in and out of the humanitarian industry, talked to everyone from all these different places, and to which it was concluded that lack of access to quality education and lack of access to information is one of the root causes of all these world issues. So that became a statement that I needed to understand. I was like, okay, how do we increase access to quality education in the world? And for who? Do we want to do it for those who are living a really great life, who have a really great education, but it could be a little better? Or do we want to focus on the people who were born to situations not set up for their future, or who fell into those because of something external? So that big question was sitting there. And then an old innovation from a long time ago that it was in my mind came up. So when I was in first grade, I really, really loved learning. And my sister was 3 years older than me. So she was learning, these cool things that I wanted access to, like long division and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna take her textbooks and read through the whole textbooks and learn everything. So I remember sitting in my room with 3 big textbooks in front of me that were hers. And I was so excited to learn all the textbooks. And then I started opening them and realizing a lot of this information is not really necessary for me to actually learn the core concept that I want to learn. So I flipped to the summary section of each of these chapters and saw that it was these complex ideas but broken down in more simplified ways. But it wasn't simple enough for my first grader mind to understand. So I took little flashcards and I broke those simplified versions up into even more simplified step-by-steps ways of learning. And then I started learning very complex concepts at a young age, because I was able to break down complex ideas into simple, digestible ways. And I started doing that, and I got ahead in class. And then I taught a friend how to do that, and then they got ahead in class. And I was like, whoa, this works. So I kept doing it. And then I remember in freshman year of high school, I was sitting in my room, surrounded by mountains of flashcards and a lot of used up pens. And I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm damaging the environment. I'm single-handedly damaging the environment. Because in our school, they taught us to really care deeply about the environment and ensure we weren't wasting goods like paper and other things. So I was like, well, maybe I should go find a digital flashcard device, something I can make flashcards on. And this was before smartphones and before apps existed. So I went online to find this, and lo and behold, it didn't exist. So I was like, whoa, I'm going to create this big innovation, a digital flashcard device that everyone's going to want to use. And then I was like, wait, no one really knows how to, make these flashcards the way I do it for learning. And also, I have no clue how to build a device. So I just parked that idea in my head. But then when that moment came, how do we scale quality education to the most under-resourced regions in the world? This old idea came back, and I was like, wait, what if? What if a device like this could be a solution? So I went online to see what other initiatives like that existed. And there were some that existed, but they weren't working out too well. And online I shared why. So there was so much opportunity for something to actually work in this whole field like this. So from that moment on, I was like, this is possible. So I designed my life so I could one day make this a reality. So I went to school for electrical engineering to learn how to build the device. I took jobs in education, development, sales, business management, and more to learn how to run a company to do this. And then 3 days after graduation, turned down a bunch of six-figure engineering job offers to start this, moved out to the Bay on almost $0, and started this. So what this is, so this is Jara. So Jara means root in the Nepali language. So we chose the word root because people need their roots to grow, but sometimes your roots get uprooted out of your control. So we empower people and give them agency to grow their roots again. And when I talk about scaling quality education, I'm not just talking about only the standard K-12. Firstly, I'm talking about K-12 custom to the region in the relevant languages. I'm also talking about access to information. Whenever anyone here, any of us need to learn something new, we go and find the resources so we can learn. We go online to learn, we go talk to people to learn, we go to get access to information, because we have a lot of access to a lot of information. But unfortunately, a lot of the world doesn't have that immediate access to information. Also, education looks like community development, teaching people, what resources on the ground they could use that's localized so they can rebuild structures their way that's culturally relevant and sustainable, as opposed to foreigners coming in and building it in the foreign way. So this looks like how to build a plumbing system with the resources around you in Western Nepal, or how to build a clean water system with the resources around you in South Sudan. And the resources around you is a big aspect to this. So this is the Jara unit. And for many of you here, you work at Samsung. So big question that could be coming up right now is, why hardware? Why would you ever build hardware? Because what most people in this industry knows is hardware is hard. Yeah, you all can relate. So we chose hardware because it was necessary to build it ourselves. So let's take a classroom as an example. We see people building classrooms all the time, all around the world. That's great. But what's the use of a classroom without quality teachers? It's very hard sometimes to get quality teachers to some of these very dangerous areas, like a refugee camp, a war-torn region, post-disaster zones. So oftentimes, structures are built, but it's not filled with quality teachers. But what if you have that, a structure and quality teachers? Well, so often, the wars are too heavy, or the systems aren't in place for a child to even leave their house to get to a classroom. So there's a huge population of children who can't access the classroom. So then, yes, classroom teachers, okay, access to that could be hard, but what if you just handed maybe 10 textbooks to a child in their home? Couldn't they learn like that? Unfortunately, most textbooks that do reach these regions are often foreign textbooks that have Jack, John, and Jill eating hot dogs, which, someone in post-disaster Nepal would not be able to relate to, for example. Oftentimes the language isn't even relevant. So that's, one problem with textbooks. Another problem with textbooks is they're static, The content won't be updated ever, and oftentimes the ones that reach these regions are outdated from even the 60s, quite often. Other problems is the student can't interact with it and engage with it. So it's kind of like when I was sitting there, staring at a bunch of textbooks, being like, most of this is not even relevant. So what about the average tablet or the average smartphone? We hear about them, people all around the world getting more smartphones. And tablets, if they're already made, they sound like a good solution, right? But firstly, if you were to break your phone, it's pretty expensive and not too exciting to fix. Imagine being somewhere in a refugee camp or in a post-disaster zone, and your one education device, which is a shiny, cool tablet or a shiny phone, breaks. The chance of someone going and putting in the money and putting in the time to go and fix it is so slim, and that's what we've seen and learned from other initiatives who have tried it with these tablets. Another problem children run into is access to power on the ground. It's very rare that people have power on the ground in post-disaster zones, war zones, or refugee camps, or if they do have access to generators around, the parents don't want to give the child money to go charge their education device. And that was another big issue, was how do we charge these? Also, with these tablets, they're just very, very expensive. And we've seen time and time again, they end up in more powerful hands. So usually the most powerful person in the whole region collects all the tablets from the children, sells it on the black market, does so many other things with it. Or even if it belongs to the family, they're like, this tablet is worth 5 of our houses, I'm gonna sell it. It's a no-brainer. So how do we design something alongside locals the way they want it? With the constraints due to environment, due to costs, due to something that makes sense. And that's why we're building hardware, because nothing else exists that was built alongside locals the way they want it all around the world, that can be customized to the culture in the region. So this is the jar unit. This is one of our prototypes. So we charge it using crank power and solar cells on the back. We do this so it doesn't need any access to power on the ground, generators, anything like that. And it's fun for kids. Through our research, kids loved just powering it, using the crank power, for example. It's interactive with push buttons. We've designed this to be extremely durable. So we're designing it to be dust-proof, waterproof, break-proof, and heat-proof. So the child can learn anywhere, anytime. We're designing this to be a supplement to under-resourced classrooms, so teaching teachers how to integrate this in the classroom. We're also designing this to be a solution for out-of-school children so they could eventually attain their degrees they need, despite their circumstances. And this is an IoT device. So how many of you are familiar with IoT here? Yeah, so IoT is the Internet of Things. It's the idea of, hardware could talk to hardware, could talk to hardware, all within their own network. It's the idea of exchanging access to information, data, being transferred between hardware everywhere. So we've designed this to be an IoT device because we realize how important it is for this device to grow with the child. We're designing this to grow with the child from kindergarten to 12th grade. And it needs to grow with the child in terms of content, in terms of what they're interested in terms of what's happening in society, because things are always changing, new developments, new things to learn. Why should it be that these children in these post-disaster zones or refugee camps get the worst education? Why? They should be getting the best education. So that's what we're doing with this. And currently, there's almost no data on the status of education in some of these post-disaster regions. With this, we're able to send and pull data. We're able to have real impact metrics, which is something that very few humanitarian aid organizations can say they can do, because this is an IoT device. And all it requires is one person with one smartphone in the region. So our business model with this is we sell them to governments, NGOs, corporations, and the money we make goes back into impact so we can scale more. We're not in the business of, all of us on the team making a ton of money. We're in the business of making a ton of impact. And that's something unique to us. And that's something we hope more and more companies and organizations adopt in the world. So we're starting in Nepal to start. And then we're scaling globally. So you might be wondering, why Nepal? There's so many regions around the world who have dealing with so much hardship. Why Nepal? And a lot of people today don't even know what's going on in Nepal. In 2015, Nepal was hit by an earthquake. That earthquake destroyed about 6,000 to 9,000 schools. Since then, it's been 3 years, and only about a third of these schools have been rebuilt. Today, 65% of students in Nepal are failing their national exams. We spent time in post-disaster Nepal as a team. learning from the locals about what's life like, how has education changed, how has life changed, what's working, what's not working. We're in the business of listening, learning. So we learned. And one of the days we went to a temporary learning center in Gorkha, Nepal, which was the epicenter of the earthquake. And a temporary learning center is a sheet metal structure bolted together with dividers to create classrooms. And the one we went to, the children would walk about 4 to 6 hours alone in the mountains to get to this temporary learning center. And they did it because they believed that this education was going to be their key to becoming whatever they want to be in life, to achieving success in whatever it meant for them. Unfortunately, in this school, 5 classrooms, but only about 1 to 2 teachers at a time. This meant that students only got 20% of their day with a teacher. 80% of the day was doing self-study. And it wasn't like they had amazing books and learning materials to do self-study with. They were redoing workbooks they've already completed. But they shared their dreams and aspirations. Want to be teachers, nurses, the best farmers, an electrical engineer. But unfortunately, the education they're getting today is not going to enable them to become what they want to be. We're currently living in a world where by 2030, it's predicted that 65% of our global GDP will be from emerging markets, only if those children get educated today. And with these education crises that are happening right now, that's not the trend that's happening. So it's a pretty big emergency that we should be working with people in these situations to design a solution that works with them. There was a pretty exciting thing we did learn on this research trip too. When children would go home to their houses, even in the most remote regions of the world, many families do have at least one smartphone, or at least one phone. And unfortunately, there's not much access to power on the ground. Sometimes there's hydropower, but not much access to power on the ground to charge your phone all the time. So they don't use it at the rate we use it. But oftentimes, children get maybe 5 minutes every few days to use their parents' smartphone for anything they want. And time again, in these post-disaster parts of Nepal, we learned that children would take that time to go to YouTube to learn something new. It was one of their favorite things. These children are internally motivated to learn. Why must they be limited to 5 minutes every few days to learn something new and exciting? So currently, we have over 15 countries in the world that have reached out to purchase tens of thousands of our jar units each, which is super exciting, especially since we're in prototype mode still. We're still in doing product development, but everyone's already lined up to purchase these. And there's a reason why they've all organically reached out to us. They recognize that we, as JARA, are doing this right. They realize that we understand what to do, which is co-creation. This can't be done isolated in San Francisco, just building things out and shipping and just dropping off. They know that doesn't work because governments, countries, everyone has seen it time and time again, and it just doesn't work. But they know we're co-creating it, doing it right. So if there's any takeaway, any of you take away from today, is if you ever get involved in humanitarian development, do this. Listen, assume nothing, ask questions, and iterate. That's a big one, assuming nothing and listening. It's so easy to assume what works for us can work for everyone else in the world. But right now we're in a world where, right now we're sitting here, we have easy access to water, we have easy access to power on the ground, we have a lot of access. So that's why you need to co-create solutions with people you're looking to serve or empower. And these countries recognize that we're doing it right by doing that. So everything we're doing is on the backbones of research. So Stanford did 6 years of research on how effective is teaching children in underserved regions using devices like this. And they found it to be highly effective when the content is gamified, when the device is extremely durable, when the device can charge without needing power on the ground. Those are some of the key things that was the biggest takeaways, but it works. And Stanford was hoping that someone would come and scale it. And that's what we're doing. And then we went to Nepal and we did a bunch of research and released a research deck on what education is like in Nepal post-disaster. And the process that we're going to be doing with this is every single new region and country you go to, we're always going to do the same process. Research, validation, pre-pilot, pilot. And if all that works, only if, then we'll launch. We're not in the business of just being like, we're 100 million children have our devices, yay, because guess what? If it's not actually helping them, why are we doing this? So we want to ensure that this is something that is designed right alongside locals. And the way we do that is we hire locals full-time to be the faces of our organization. The locals are the ones who distribute these. They're the ones who teach their community how to use these. They're the ones who teach people how to fix them when broken, and they are the ones who maintain continuous use of this. And that's a really important side of this, is that. Because here's an example. Right now, we're all in this beautiful space, and everyone's pretty comfortable, and we're feeling happy and good. Imagine if an alien storms through the door with a brick and goes up to one of you. And they're like, this brick is going to save your life. Take it. Okay, let's do a selfie. Bye. Your chance of adopting that brick is near zero. Maybe like, whoa, a strange alien came in, everyone will talk about it for a little bit. Or, whoa, this is a thing, let's explore it, and maybe for a few days it's a little novel. But after that, there's no point in continuously using it because it's just a brick. It doesn't mean anything. And often we see orgs drop hundreds of thousands of bricks. Imagine we're sitting here and then 100,000 bricks appear and then they leave. Now we're stuck with the labor of dealing with these 100,000 bricks. And we see that happen all the time. That's why it's up to us to work alongside locals, for that person to be sitting with a child, ask them, hey, how's your day going? How's life going? So let's take an example. For example, we have Abi over here on the IoT team. He's one of our mentors. And imagine if Abi from Samsung walks in and brings you a brick and tells you, asks you how your day is going, how life's going, asks you, how your education is going, what you like, what you don't like, teaches you how to use this brick. And then Avi's like, okay, I'm going to check in every 2 to 3 days on how your time with this brick is going. Your chance of adopting this skyrockets, because Abi is someone who's part of your community. Abi is someone you respect and recognize. And, Abi was speaking your native language too, which is so important. So that skyrockets your chance. And Abi's checking in every day, every few days on the continuous use. So that's one of the biggest aspects of this. So where Jara fits in the whole scope of things. So we supplement under-resourced classrooms, and we're a solution for out-of-school children. So some examples are, there's some areas of the world where women can't go and leave their house to get an education because they have to stay home doing wifely duties at a very young age. There are child laborers who by day they have to work, and some child laborers choose to work to support their family. But what if by night they could come home and learn and get their degrees? So all the educational content on the JAR unit, it's all from digital content creators all around the world. We know what we're good at. We're great at creating the hardware, and we're great at the distribution process. But there's so many people who are fantastic at creating digital educational content customized to the region all around the world. So we partner with them. We enable them to finally reach these most underserved regions, because most digital content creators can't reach areas without constant access to internet, without access to power on the ground, without access to the shiny tablets and the fancy computers. But we're finally the way that these digital content creators can reach the most under-resourced regions of the world. On top of this, the content, it's like, why would a child want to keep using this every day? Yes, they're intrinsically motivated is what we found, but also we've gamified this experience. So on our device, the more education a child completes, they get points on the device. And then you could cash in the points on the device to play games, a certain amount of minutes of games. And that's the whole mindset of the more you learn, the more you get to play. And that's super exciting to children. And one thing we learned is we can't just have this be an isolated experience. That never works. It has to be a community experience. So we've designed this to have lessons where students have to come together to solve something, come together to learn something, come together and get the adults to come and build structures on the ground. This is designed to bring community even closer together in a way that's culturally relevant while preserving cultural roots. That's one of the most important parts of development, is the preservation of cultural roots, because that gets lost. It gets lost so quickly. So we have an incredible team that has come together to make this happen over these past few years. We have people who have lived in refugee camps as high schoolers, creating initiatives alongside youth. We have people who are experts in the field of emergency education. We have people who have implemented emergency education initiatives in areas like Nepal and beyond. We have engineers who have built out products for post-disaster regions, and our team's list goes on. So I believe that everybody deserves access to quality education in this world. This is an education crisis that nobody is talking about. It's silently happening. We can't be silent anymore. We have to be loud about this. And we can't do this alone. We need your minds at the table. We need the most powerful people in the world, governments, all these other powerful people at the table. Most importantly, we need the people, the children, community leaders, families in these situations at the table with the leaders, with brilliant minds, everyone coming together. We need the world coming together to make this happen. So my call to action and ask from all of you is, please join us on this journey. All of you are here working for Samsung because you're brilliant. You have a skill set like no other. And us as an organization, we don't have much funds, but we have a mission, and research is proving out that something like this is one of the solutions. So we would love for you to join us to make this happen. I believe in a world where everyone has access to empowerment, agency, and dignity for all. Do you? Thank you.
We have time for a few questions.
Thank you. It seems like a good chunk of what you're doing is also dependent upon relevant content. You mentioned that you're partnering, right? But a lot of the functions and features also seem that they're tied to the hardware. Talk a little bit about how you're working with content creators and how you're utilizing the hardware in novel ways.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you for that question. I think that was a great connection that you made. So yes, so it is dependent on the content too. There's a lot of really great digital content creators who are doing this right, and they're already in the field in not the most extreme regions we're working in, but close to these extreme regions, and it's being proven out effective. But their main thing in the way is the hardware breaks. The children don't get 24 access to it. They can't bring the hardware home because it's expensive, and so many other reasons. So right now, for the operating system, at first, we learn a lot in the process of this design. So at first, we're like, let's create a custom OS, yeah, da, da, da. But then we realized almost so many content creators use Android operating system, for example. So that's one of the design specs that we've changed since to accommodate these, is having Android platform. Another way is we have a few ways to kind of integrate some of the fun features of this. So right now, we're exploring, since so many children enjoyed using the crank, we're figuring out how can we integrate the crank into one of the educational games, for example. That's one of the ways. A lot of the content creators, their content's designed to work in, I guess, like hardware that can be novel. So what we're discussing with some of the digital content creators is taking pieces of their content and taking pieces of other content and putting them together in its own way in our device. But the main big thing is we're using Android OS for this. Yeah. Did that answer the question? Or?
No, I think that helps. I would imagine some of the regions you're in, like Nepal, for example, there may not be a ton of content creators just lining up to create content in Nepalese or whatever, right? So how are you dealing with that?
Yes. So there actually is there has been a boom of people working on digital content for somewhere like Nepal, for example. People are realizing that textbooks themselves, they're not that sustainable. So there's people digitizing textbooks in Nepal specifically. There's a lot of organizations that are taking pieces of open source organizations, like taking pieces of Khan Academy, taking pieces of Coursera, taking pieces of this and this, and they've become their own organization. So that's how we're able to bring everyone together. And then we talk to local governments and local organizations to see what do they need, what are the requirements for the child to get success. So what do they need in their national exams? What do they need to succeed, et cetera, and then we supplement that by what communities ask for. So a lot of that content is digitized right now, and for the parts that aren't digitized, that's where we can work alongside these educational content creators to be like, hey, do all of like these 10 educational content organizations want to come together and come together and find content and create content alongside locals in this region? So we kind of empower them to all collaborate. Yeah.
How are you funded, and how does the content creators get compensated?
Yes. That is an amazing question. That's actually one of our questions too. So we are 2 years into the business side of it existing. Before it was all research-based. So in terms of our organization being funded, we won our first check from Cisco back in the spring from their Global Problem Solver Challenge through their CSR program, which was $75K, and that was incredible for us. An interesting fact about us, we managed to do 2 years of development, of research, of building out prototypes. We managed to do it on $0. That's something, yeah. It's like, it's something I'm really proud to say. But also the other side of it is it's really, it gets tough to fundraise for development too sometimes. So so we did 2 years and $0. Now we have $75K. In order for us to get to the next milestones, we need some more funds. So that's what we're currently fundraising for. And then on the who pays who for content. So if someone were to ask me right now, what's your biggest struggle right now, is the answer to that question. That's what we'd love to learn, is who should be paying who? Should we be paying content creators for them to give us the content so we could use it? Or should content creators be paying us so they can reach some of the most remote regions so they can have impact there? So we don't know the answer to that. So we'd love to brainstorm with anyone here if anyone has ideas. And we've been sitting with content creators too, and we both sit together and like a whole teams, and we were like, we don't know the answer to this yet. So that's something we have to explore. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yes, it's a question. So you mentioned you want us to join. And can you maybe elaborate a little bit on what type of possibilities you see besides joining you full-time? Kind of how can we join besides joining full-time?
Definitely. Thank you so much for that question. There's a lot of ways to volunteer time with us. So as you can see, it is a technology device. And a lot of people here have a deep skill set in hardware and software. So if anyone wants to volunteer time, even 1 day or 2 or a little bit more with us to help us build this out, we'd love to welcome that. We're in product development stages right now. So it's a very exciting time to be on here. Who wouldn't want to say that they directly contributed to the development of what's going to be one of the most impactful education solutions out there? You'll be able to say that. So we'd love to have support on the hardware, software side, or even strategy. This is a big endeavor. So there's a lot of sides you can volunteer your time, even for a day or 2 or however long you want. But we're in the business of collaboration, and we would love any of you, any of your friends, anyone you know, to join us on this journey. This needs to happen together. So the more the merrier for this. Yeah.
What do you think is going to be the average cost of hardware?
Yes. So that's one of the really exciting things about what we're doing. We have used a lot of reverse innovation techniques, designing for affordability techniques, and a lot of other techniques to bring what we project to be $5 for manufacturing and assembly at scale. Yeah. And we've done that by, making some, making some design sacrifices, if you will. So a normal tablet has a really great color LCD screen, has touch screen, has a lot of other shiny, cool aspects, has some of the fastest processors. What we learned talking and designing this with locals around the world is they don't need the coolest, fastest processor. They don't need a colored screen. They don't need the coolest, shiniest thing. They just want something that gets them a lot of information and that they can interact with in the right way. So for example, our theory right now is that we'll be using a black and white screen. We might be proven differently as time goes on. Our theory right now is a black and white screen that's not touch screen. It's operated through push buttons. We're planning on using a much slower processor. For example, you press a button and it's maybe a few second wait till something happens, which is what most of us used to be used to before this huge spike in our technology recently. So that's some of the trade-offs we'll do. But this also has a speaker in it too, which enables teaching of literacy and also having educational audio. There's a lot of educational videos that exist, especially through content creators. But in order to keep the costs very low, we'll exchange video for just audio, which still has a very impactful effect. So we're talking to a few video creators too in that content side. But yeah, we're going for the $5 is our aim. Yes. Yes, please.
Could you speak to this?
Oh, sure. So the ideal of the hardware is to give access to all of the children who don't have access to education. So practical use is that they'll take it home, they'll use it in the classroom both ways. So now I have, there's a 5-year-old at home and there's a 10-year-old at home and a 16-year-old at home. So it's the ideal that the 5-year-old, well, whoever uses it first, they'll get their content and they can pass it on to the next person, the next child in the home.
That's a wonderful question. So that question is around, like, how does this really live in the lives, especially with multiple children, multiple ages, which happens a lot. So we're starting with 10 to 13-year-olds are going to be the first people using this, since we need a focus to start with our pilots. Eventually, we'll scale to K to 12. And with that, when we do introduce this to families and to regions, we're going to be bringing a surplus of these. So that's one of the biggest issues when someone delivers a physical product for humanitarian development is a lot of times there's a scarcity of that, and then that causes discord, it causes black market sales of this and this. If we have a surplus of these, every child who wants one has one, firstly, and then the content is updatable. So that enables it to grow with the child. So for example, the experience, if you will, of the child, it could have something like, it asks your age, it does some tests to figure out what education level you are, because some people are 16, but they're at the education level of a 7-year-old, for example. So it asks for age, then it asks, it does a bunch of test questions, and then it figures out where you are academically. And that's something that some content creators have figured out how to do, is that system. So that's a system we're implementing into this. And so ideally, in the whole ideal situation, all 3 children have their own. But if they don't, the children so these devices require a username. So children are able to put their username in. So kind of like a Game Boy, for example, if you ever experienced that. Most consoles had usernames, and you put in that, something like that. So for example, 3 children, 3 different names, they just go to their name and go from where they left off. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
How many places have you found that done this and actually have, say, remote areas that don't even have access to internet and are even providing that kind of connectivity?
Yes.
One cell phone. What about infrastructure?
Yes. So the question was about what about infrastructure? For example, how many regions have we done research in and visited that actually had internet access to do these updates? So we are currently talking to an IoT provider that has figured out how to do IoT updates in very remote regions with very little access to internet. And that is through the process of using phone towers and phones. So that's what we're looking at right now. And that's what creates the ability to create those updates. So,
How does this connect to you?
yes, have these? So a Bluetooth low energy chip is what we're looking at right now. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Since you talked about impact,
Yes.
can you say a little about how you measure the impact?
Yes.
And do you also measure the engagement with the device?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. How do we measure impact? So as the child goes through this device, it tracks the experience the child is doing. And there's a few ways to measure it. For example, as there's quizzes on the device, that enables the child to figure out where they are academically. And since it is digital, it's a little different than the quizzes we do by paper, because it's able to, while you're doing it, teach you actually how to figure out the right answer, as opposed to, so many of us, we do quizzes, we finish it, get one wrong, and we don't check often. But with this, the children have access to learning what they should be learning and not leaving it behind, for example. We're able to see the iteration process of that and how many times it took a child to learn what they need to learn. We're able to see how far the child was able to progress academically. There's also survey questions throughout this that children can answer to. This even has access to opportunity to pull data that originally wasn't accessible. For example, is the soil today dry or is it wet? And that data is very valuable, having, and understanding environmental data in very remote regions, for example. So the children are able to do that, and then we're able to pull that through our IoT pulls and updates. And then there's the other side, which is community development. So in this, we're able to, teach communities how to use their own resources to rebuild systems. And our JARA ambassadors are tasked with about every week to take a picture of what's been being built, and we're able to publish that on our website so people can see the progress of physical structures being built. And then from there, we're able to get the data from how are their national exams going, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, those are some of the ways we're measuring impact. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you speak to the mic?
Is this, as you mentioned the United Nations scenario, is this also partially funded for your startup through the multiple United Nations programs?
Yeah, so we haven't sent proposals to the United Nations programs yet. We're very excited to eventually start doing that, but not yet. But we would love any ideas of who we should be talking to figure out how to get funds for this, because we have an enormous amount of research, an enormous amount of demand. So we're in a place where we're figuring out how to strategically do this. So if anyone has ideas, we'd love to hear some. Yeah. Wonderful, thank you all so much. Thank you.